Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. We are here at Rhodes House at Oxford University, and we're going to be talking about why you should apply for the Rhodes Scholarship. My name is Nadiya Figueroa and I'm Dean of Scholarships here. So what is the Rhodes Scholarship? It's an award for postgraduate study at Oxford University. People study for anywhere from 2 to 3 years. You can study anything you want to at the university, but beyond the academic experience, you're also here with a cohort of 100 other young people from all over the world, and you join a community of Rhodes Scholars, over 4,000 alive, all over the world. So, what do we look for in Rhodes Scholars? There's an academic performance aspect, which means probably like a 4.0 or close to that. But it also means that you're really critically engaged with what you're studying. But beyond that, there's also the leadership aspect. And what do we mean by leadership? Really young people who have shown that they want to use their energy and their talent to make a difference, usually in service of something, beyond themselves. And this is an opportunity to connect with others who are like-minded. But don't take my word for it. We're actually going to hear from 3 scholars who are here in Oxford studying, and we want to hear from them about why they applied. But before we go there, let's just hear who they are. Colin, Harj, and Serena.
Hi, I'm Colin. I'm from Wisconsin in the US, Upper Midwest, and I'm doing an MPhil in geography here, but secretly just doing a political science degree in the geography department.
There we go.
I'm Harj. I'm from Tasmania in Australia. I studied in Sydney, and I'm doing law here in the BCL.
Cool. And Serena?
I'm Serena. I got elected from Hong Kong, currently doing a DPhil in zoology, studying a weird gene in sand rats.
Sand rats. Yes. Yeah. So for those of you who are joining, please do like the video, get on our social media channels, and most importantly, if you have any questions that come up, just comment and we'll make sure to include those in the conversation. So we want to start with why, these 3 young persons decided to apply for this. Like, did you know about the scholarship way before you applied? What was the story behind it? Did you imagine that you would get it, that you'd be here? Harj?
Yeah, it's quite famous in Australia, so I'd heard of it before. But I think that was one of the reasons why I almost didn't apply. There's a lot of prestige attached to it, and it took me a while to get to the point of looking at it. I think it was when I came to the end of my undergraduate degree and I thought about studying some more. I looked at Oxford, I looked at the particular program here I wanted to study, and the scholarship was a way to do that. So it was, I think, funding was the first thing that drew me to the scholarship, and then as I looked into it, I think the values of the community was something that appealed to me as well.
So it's something that you were aware of, but you kind of had to work up to feeling like
Definitely.
This is something you could do for you.
Definitely, yeah. I think it was very intimidating at first to think of myself as potentially being someone who could even apply for it, let alone get it. So yeah, I think one of the main points for me was when a friend of mine got the scholarship. I think that was when I realized that normal human beings get it who, don't do well at stuff, and that was kind of the moment when I thought, okay, I can do this.
Yeah. Yep. Serena, what about you?
I think kind of similar for me. So it's also a really prestigious scholarship in Hong Kong, and I guess for me, as I approached the end of my undergrad, I kind of was thinking, I'd like to keep on doing the research, kind of do a PhD project. So I rode around and I found this really cool project in the zoology department here in Oxford. I was like, okay, now I need to try to get myself to Oxford. And I did hear about the Rhodes Scholarships. It was advertised basically every year in my school. But somehow I just had the weird impression that it was a scholarship not really for STEM background people. It was kind of people usually went to do law degrees or social sciences maybe. So I was kind of it really can't hurt for me to just try applying. I was not expecting that I would get it, which is can't hurt, and did my PS, and professors were willing to write recommendations for me. So I was like, okay, but I think maybe that sort of attitude kind of saved me in the end.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we should share with viewers that there are actually going to be a new series of videos that will support applicants in kind of going through the process of putting their application together. So everything from how do you find the right referees to what you were saying about your personal statement, or even choosing what course you'd want to study at Oxford, because there's everything here that you could possibly imagine. So look out for those. But let's hear from Colin and kind of what his story was to applying.
Yeah, I mean, I very much applied not expecting to get it. It was actually the sort of hiccup in my plans was getting the Rhodes, because
It's not much of a surprise.
Yeah, I'm someone who sort of the way I thought about it is personal statements are really just a dedicated time for self-reflection, and you sort of put aside time. For me, I write in the morning, so I put aside time, 30 minutes every morning for a while, and I just sort of sat and wrote and sort of worked through, like, who am I actually, and what do I want to do, and how does what I have done in the past relate to what I want to do in the future. And it was sort of a time to do that. In the US, the Rhodes is, very much sort of charged with sort of politics and policy, sort of symbols, right? Bill Clinton was a Rhodes, Cory Booker, Eric Garcetti, the list just stretches for a long time. And as someone interested in politics and policy, I was like, well, may as well throw my hat in the ring, what harm does it do? But I was very much not expecting to get it, because I'm like, me, I'm just, I still like trip over my feet when I get out of bed in the morning. So like, yeah, I mean, the process was sort of very happenstance, obviously like took a lot of self-reflection, but I think I viewed it more as like, just like applying to the scholarship was sort of the tip of the iceberg. The bigger part was like the self-reflection part of it.
Self-reflection to getting there. I mean, what's interesting about what you're each saying is that there was this idea of what a Rhodes Scholar is, or what the Rhodes Scholarship is, and then you each had kind of your own personal journeys to getting there. If it was like someone who you recognized as like a regular person who was a great person who got it, and you're like, okay, I can do that. Or it was also the opportunity. Like, this is an award to study at Oxford, to do anything I want to do for a postgraduate degree. Like, that's significant. Or it was also like the opportunity to really reflect on kind of where you want to go with your life. That's really powerful. So saying hello to folks who've kind of just signed on, thanks for joining us. We're talking about why you should apply for the Rhodes Scholarship. For those who are less familiar with the Rhodes Scholarship, it is an award for postgraduate study at Oxford University. You can study whatever you want to do, but beyond the degree, you also get the opportunity to join this really strong community of people who are concerned about standing up in the world for something that they're passionate about, and connecting kind of across the globe, because Rhodes Scholars come from every corner. The next thing that we want to get into is kind of what is the experience like for you? And I should say we have folks from constituencies or countries or regions that have usually sent Rhodes Scholars, because we're over 100 years old as an institution. But recently we've also been opening up, which is fantastic. So there are many places now that send Rhodes Scholars who've never sent scholars before. So we have folks who are here from China. This year, actually, you'll be able to apply from anywhere, these global scholarships. So especially for those who don't know anything about Oxford, like, paint a picture of this place. Like, what is it like? What has it been like for you? What's an average day like? What surprises you? Mischievous laughter, you can share it.
Probably less studying than you'd think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a beautiful place for once. I mean, right now it's summer, so it's green and the flowers are out and the weather's incredible. So, I mean, for me, that means I'm outdoors a lot. I play a few different sports in my college. I play soccer and cricket. I've given rowing a try, some Australian rules football as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think I'm someone who enjoys joining in with groups and societies and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of activity for me in that sense, but as I'm sure these guys will attest, there's a lot of talks going on constantly, a lot of interesting groups meeting around, whether it's political topics or yeah, just different kind of academic interests. There's a lot of vibrancy to the place. So yeah, it's quite engaging.
Yeah. Have you found similarly, Colin, or?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of the thing that I have found about Oxford is it's very much a place where sort of no one's telling you what to do, and there's sort of all the good stuff and all the bad stuff that comes with that. You know, the good stuff is you get to pick exactly how you spend your days. You know, my first year I was here, you know, I'm from Wisconsin, and you know, didn't have a whole bunch of time to sort of read the New Yorker religiously and like really sort of get up to date on sort of cultural issues, and that's really how I used my time. I would sort of spend every weekend morning, and I would read the New Yorker sort of cover to cover rather than doing schoolwork, and that was sort of a priority I set. Right, my goal was to get familiar with different writers in the New Yorker. But the sort of flip side is of no one telling you what to do is you're sort of forced to confront yourself and sort of say like, what is it I actually want to do, and like, what am I doing that like really, like, right? You have to justify your use of time to only yourself, and sort of that you have a lot of time for self-reflection, and particularly, you know, the summers here are really beautiful and really nice, but in the winters that self-reflection can really turn to rumination and sometimes not be as great, but it like, right, in the wash it all comes out. You know, and there are lots of talks. I find it's a very social place for me, and that's been really, really, for me, the best part of Oxford is the people.
It's such a balance, because I was here 10 years ago studying international development as a Rhodes Scholar from Jamaica, and that thing that you say about the amount of time that you have to kind of just spend kind of figuring out, okay, what do I want to be up to? It's interesting, like after the fact you look back at it and you're like, you know, that was actually quite a privilege to have had that opportunity, because like you get going on things beyond here and you're like, wow, those friendships that I made or those insights that I had, you know, are really serving me well. But Serena, tell us a bit about, you know, what you value about being here. And for folks who are joining us, please do comment, you know, perhaps tell us what country you're joining from, you know, so we can say hello. Serena.
I guess for me, it was also a lot of like, it was more about the people, I guess. And yes, also the freedom that you kind of enjoy to like allocate time, because yes, I do work in a laboratory. I have to do experiments. I have to be there on site. But I guess like in Oxford, there's less of, you have to be here at 8 a.m., you leave at 8 p.m. You kind of like, you get to arrange like when you want to do these like experiments and when you will like kind of sit back and like read more maybe about the literature. And also there's so many different people here from like so many different backgrounds. At Rhodes House, when you get to like meet all the scholars from around the world, and in the university when there's like people coming from all over the world to do different degrees. And yeah, so it's I think what I most value here is about meeting the people and also meeting the wildlife around Oxford. So walks in Port Meadows are just amazing with like the ponies coming out to graze and all the birds that you can see. I really value that. Yeah.
I want to ask you guys a bit about, I guess, picking up on the theme that you started on, things that have challenged you or things that you have brought with you kind of into this place. You know, so I'm thinking, for instance, Colin, last week you were pretty nervous over a presentation you had to do, you know, and he's sitting here talking about how he has time to reflect, and but you're also pushing yourself beyond the reflection, because you took on like a pretty hardcore kind of political science presentation, even though that's not quite what you're studying, but you wanted to do it, you know, and your roadie friends encouraged you to do it.
Yes, yeah. I sort of, got my arm twisted into presenting it. You know, it was like a lunchtime seminar, and I think I'm someone where I enjoy sort of talking to people, but academic presentations I always get very insecure about the data I have for research, because a lot of the research I do is qualitative. You know, it's sitting down and interviewing people and talking about, you know, what makes their life meaningful, how they think about politics. And so sitting up and presenting that in front of an audience where, you know, one of my really close friends here is an economist and incredibly good at statistics. And I was, you know, every time I do a presentation, I present so that I'm sort of legitimate in his eyes, you know, whatever I'm doing. And I think that, I mean, was intimidating and challenging, and, you know, but incredibly helpful in sort of understanding how a different discipline from mine sort of approaches the same type of questions I'm asking. I think a lot of what sort of it comes with is, you know, people talk about imposter syndrome, and I think there's there's some of that amongst disciplines and amongst just having so much time to, sit and reflect and sort of choose the direction of your work. In my own discipline, geography, it's such a broad discipline that you can kind of choose to take your work wherever you like it. And again, that the sort of freedom, the academic freedom, can be very double-edged. But you come out, I've found at least that I come out after those sort of challenges like the presentation, sort of more self-assured of what I'm doing.
And that you had to kind of figure it out yourself in some ways, and that there's lots of different directions you could take, but you have to sort it. Yeah. Serena, I'm thinking actually of something that you and a few of the scholars did this year, which was the first kind of Chinese New Year celebration at Rhodes House. Because I'm thinking of how people kind of push themselves academically in new directions and kind of have to find a way to do that, but also how people push themselves socially, culturally, like getting to know people and like ways of doing things that they maybe weren't even exposed to before. So I don't know if you'd share a little bit about that.
Well, so this year, earlier in like February, myself and a few other like Chinese scholars, we kind of like organized this spring festival event in Rhodes House. I mean, I think it was just, we saw how like a lot of American scholars did the like Thanksgiving dinner thing, and like Rhodes House was pretty like chill with like having these sorts of like scholar events. They were like really, really supportive of like having us do it. And it was just, we got together with the second batch of like Chinese scholars, and then we were out having dinner one day when like one of us was like, do you want to do this spring festival thing in Rhodes House? And we were like, that would be a great idea. And then we just went to talk to Mary, and like, she was all very supportive, and we were like, yes, let's do it. But then we ran into like all sorts of issues with like the restaurant and like finding suppliers, and it was like
the real work of putting on a mega event, right?
Yes, but we were like, we have to do this. Yeah, just that like we had the opportunity to share this with like all of our fellow scholar friends and like make it an event that we could like enjoy, and like it just turned out great. Definitely having the second one hopefully next year.
Yeah, but that's something that's really cool to see, is how scholars come in and create all sorts of initiatives and groups, so there are groups that are doing consultancy projects, pro bono, or there are groups that are thinking of, well, how do we do startups that are socially like contributing, or there are folks who are like doing creative things, like we had the Shakespeare in the Garden, we'll actually be having an opera, I think it's this week. Later in the week. And I think that's actually linking in with groups that do community service. So folks that they interact with beyond Oxford, the university, into Oxford, the town, will be coming into the house for that opera performance, which would be super cool. So we have a question, guys. Someone, Yaya, is saying that they have a STEM degree, yet wish to apply for international development, and what would help with their application. So we're not going to get into too many specifics, on the details of your application, because as we say, there's going to be another session on that. But I think the point that you raise on like, how do you choose what you want to study when you're here, and perhaps also how it relates to what you'd imagine you'd be able to do in the future, is a really, really important one, because I know quite a few scholars come in and actually change a bit like how they think they want to make a contribution once they leave. I don't know, Harj, I see you smiling, and I know you've been on an interesting kind of academic journey. Like, share with us.
Yeah, I mean, so as I sort of alluded to earlier, I was very committed to doing law when I came here. Because the scholarship is a 2-year scholarship, which I actually only found out in my interview when the governor of New South Wales asked me, he was like, all right, mate, you're studying law for the first year, what are you doing for the second year? And I was like, is there a second year? And he's like, yeah, there is. So I had to come up with
do your research, guys.
It took me a while to kind of figure out that what I wanted to do was study policy. But I thought that I was going to do that in my second year. But when I arrived in Oxford, I think it was being exposed to actually the other Rhodes Scholars and then just the environment in general, I realised that I wanted to maybe accelerate my engagement with that policy area. And so I switched courses to study the Masters of Public Policy last year. And I think it was only through doing that process of, I think as Yaya was mentioning, changing disciplines, trying to reinvent myself in some senses, that I actually oddly enough, found that I was actually very interested in law, and I've come back to it this year and I'm studying it again. So I think there's a small lesson there in maybe thinking deeply about why you're doing something first, because I think that I felt compelled to look beyond what I knew and kind of maybe an element of the grass is greener on the other side, but it was only that process of exploration that allowed me to appreciate my skill set and my interest in legal things, and I think I'm a better lawyer for it, and hopefully one day I'll be a better policymaker for doing that.
Yeah. So what's your academic journey been like? It's interesting that you said for some people you think of Oxford, you also think of the Rhodes Scholarship, you definitely think politics. People would know that there are folks here who are studying music. There are folks who are studying governance, particularly like artificial intelligence from like a very technological, scientific standpoint. There are folks who are doing STEM, like genetic coding for rats.
I think, so kind of for me, I was kind of pretty sure that I'd like to keep on doing scientific research. So I think one thing that kind of really helped me during my application and kind of justifying why I wanted to study this was I did send a few emails to potential supervisors being like, so what is Oxford kind of like, and do you have any future PhD projects that maybe I could get my hands on? So I kind of had a pretty good idea of what I would like to work on once I got to Oxford, and I think that helped me a lot during my application. And also I kind of want to say that it also really helped me when I reached out, because by the time I knew that I got into the final round of interview, I was like, maybe I actually do have a chance. So I did ask around my old uni and be like, can anyone kind of maybe point me to a few previous Rhodes Scholars that did STEM stuff. And I was lucky to find that so a previous scholar who did a medical degree here was very willing to have some phone calls with me and talk about what the interview was like. So I think it really helps a lot to kind of just find someone who had been doing similar degrees or studying a subject that you really want to study here in Oxford, and just chat a bit before you start writing the application, so that you know more about what you're actually coming over here to study.
Yeah, that's so useful. It's interesting because you guys are talking about the process on two levels. One, the conversation with yourself about, well, what do I want to do? Why do I want to do it? And also being open that things may change, but you have to be in that conversation with yourself. And then you're talking about that other level of you have to be diligent. There's so much information available. And it's also so that you have a better understanding of, okay, what would this feel like? What is this course about? So for a lot of people who are applying for the Rhodes Scholarship, really you can go onto the Oxford University website and you can actually see the details of all the courses that are offered here for postgraduate study. And that's important because a lot of the prerequisites, or even we often joke that sometimes something will say maybe computer science, but you need to look into it and realize it's a theory of computer science. It's not the practicalities of coding, and there may be something else that does that. So it is important to do that diligence and to kind of keep that, that conversation back and forth. Tell me something that you perhaps had in your mind as far as what this would be like that ended up not being the case. Because you guys were alluding in the beginning, Harj, you were talking about in Australia, it's a particular person perhaps that you would think of going for the Rhodes, and it surprised you when someone who was more in your circle, who perhaps wasn't that particular person, who won the scholarship. But maybe it's about Rhodes, maybe it's about Oxford. What have been some of the unanticipated things?
I think about Rhodes, the most striking thing for me was just how nice everyone was. I think I was expecting, and I think you're right, this is more about my projections, and I think the history of the scholarship and the reputation it has in a lot of countries. I was expecting a lot of egos, a lot of posturing, a lot of sort of competitiveness, but there's just really a distinctive absence of that, and I think that's something very refreshing about the community, is you actually feel like you can be yourself, and it's a welcoming, comfortable, permissive environment for that. So I think that was probably the most striking thing initially. And then that was probably the beginning of feeling like I had an identity and a place within that community, and I could kind of assume that and feel like I belonged. That was quite special.
Absolutely. It's interesting because people are asking a lot about criteria. It's like who's eligible for the scholarship. So maybe we talk about that really quickly because that's important. And then I'd like to hear kind of how you guys interpreted particularly the leadership aspect of the criteria. Yep. So there's academic performance, it's like intellectual attainment. And that really talks to, again, having performed well in school. But it's not as though you have to have this perfect, unblemished record. It is competitive. So usually it's a 3.8 to 4.0 if you're talking about the grade point average system, or it's like an upper second class, depending. But really it's that you've shown that you have that intellectual curiosity, you've really engaged with your academics and you're competitive in that way. But then there's the leadership criteria, which is fascinating because if you go back to the actual, the founder and what the vision was, it was about having this moral instinct to lead. So we talk about character, we talk about kindliness and caring for others, and that comes through in the way that someone has really utilized their energy and their talents. So I think it'd be fascinating just to hear from you guys, having gone through the process. Now on the other side of it, how do you think about what is a Rhodes Scholar, like who's eligible for it? And I know that can be a tough one. Yeah. I remember the first time someone asked me that, I was like, I came up with passion, I think. I think that's one of the things that stuck with me.
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of the leadership, leadership is one of these words that I really sort of,
see that reaction.
Yeah, it's just so, I think it's so coded with a whole bunch of stuff that, I mean, I hear the word and I'm like, wow, I am not one of those, and I try to sort of distance myself from it. But in terms of thinking sort of what unifies the sort of group of people that has been brought here under that sort of that broad category of leadership is, I think it's sort of a willingness to just like do the grunt work because you think it's important. And I think in undergrad, I did a bit of that, but what I'm thinking about is Serena brought up the Thanksgiving, and so my first year I was sort of ended up doing a lot of work to put on the Thanksgiving at Rhodes House, and I think there was this moment where nobody really wanted to do the logistical work of sort of going through spreadsheets because it's like that's not the exciting part of Thanksgiving dinner. It's not the spreadsheets of who's going to bring, this dish or that piece of cutlery. And it's sort of, for me, leadership is very much being like, all right, well, if no one else is doing this, like, we have to get it done. So, like, I'll step up and just, like, sit in front of Excel sheets for a while. And that, I think, is the very unsexy and sort of, with the sort of flash stripped away, sort of how I think of leadership. And I think there are a lot of people here who are, again, getting back to priorities, what I was mentioning earlier, sort of, whatever they end up prioritizing and sort of being very passionate about, like they're willing to sort of do the, put in the hours to get it done.
To go the extra mile.
Yeah.
And there's something there also about service orientation. So for some it has to do with really group events and being able to mobilize people, but for some it's maybe the way you are about your academic work and the passion you have for making sure that translates into making a difference for people. For some it's through art, for some it's through sport. But for you guys, when you think about when you first read the Rhodes criteria and thinking, I'm going to apply for this, how did you interpret it? How did you make it something that resonated for you?
That word leadership there just made it really difficult for me because I was more all about like thinking about how I should write in my personal statement, be like, oh, I'm really passionate about these STEM subjects. I really want to do this bit of research, and like there's that leadership issue. And I was like, should I put like really obvious on my CV, like, does it mean I have to say I was group leader for this event? I was
president of this.
I was organizer for this event. Like, I have to show that I'm like the leader of that group. And then later on, I think what really got to me was, I guess I just kept writing about like how I really wanted to do this bit of research because I couldn't like just, I don't know, I think I found it really hard to kind of like find some way to kind of like display that I was like the top person of this society or blah, 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 because I guess that was just not me. But then I was still confused about like how I should show these like leadership skills and things until actually the dinner before the final interview, when one of the members of the committee asked me, so what do you think a leader in science actually means?
Yeah.
And I was like, now I get what you're asking. Now I get what you're asking. So it's like, I think the leadership criteria is really not about trying to put on your CV like how you organize these things. It's, I guess for me, it's about thinking how like really my academic work has impact on the society, or like how it can translate into like potential applications, or just like, I think demonstrating that apart from like your own academic work, you're thinking about things other than like publishing papers, basically.
That there's something beyond that.
Yeah.
So welcoming folks who have, joined us recently. We're here, talking about why you should apply for the Rhodes Scholarship, or even if you are not, someone finishing up your undergraduate degree or kind of within the age limit, it may be that you can think of young people, really talented, who could really benefit from this opportunity. And so you're listening in to kind of recommend to them that they ought to apply. And we were just talking about the leadership criteria, because we look at academic performance, but we also look at leadership potential. And we're talking about how that leadership word can be loaded, and really how each Rhodes Scholar has their very unique way of what that means to them, and the ways in which they're looking to what they're doing in the immediacy, potentially having an impact or having a positive contribution. So Harj, we spoke a little bit about in Australia and kind of some of the, we call them the myths or the stories that are out there about what a Rhodes Scholar is and what it is to lead. But how did you interpret it for your own kind of application, and how's that evolved for you?
Yeah, I think it was kind of the same as these guys. It was sort of capital L leadership. The Prime Minister was a Rhodes Scholar, the current one, people kind of rightfully and understandably associate that with it. And I think it's interesting because I still don't feel like you asking that question, I'm like, I don't really consider myself a leader in not at all that sense, or maybe in some of these senses that people kind of think of often. And when you're speaking about service, and Cole, you're talking about doing the kind of less glamorous stuff, which just shows commitment to something. I think if it's those two things of looking beyond yourself and being committed and acting on principle, those are probably the things I can look to my record and look to my life and say, I've done some stuff that's in line with that. So that was the thing I struggled with probably the most in applying, was feeling like I deserved it on those grounds. And I think it was only when I got to the interview process that the interviewers were very quick to kind of assure me that it doesn't matter if you've been the president of X society or whatever, it's about who you are and what you're committed to, and also who you'll turn into in the future. I think there was this kind of definite sense of this scholarship coming to Oxford is, in some sense, an investment in you as a person and your values, and that'll manifest itself very differently in 20, 30 years' time, and the feeling of it kind of mattered who I was as an individual, that is kind of what gave me a bit of self-belief. It wasn't necessarily some externalized idea of I'm a leader because I've been a captain of a sporting team or something along those lines.
Can I just add on to that
Sure.
quickly? So I think one of the things is, you mentioned sort of the CV with president of this, leader of that. I mean, I think in many ways what you were saying is that in some ways that stuff is all right. Again, sort of the superficial stuff, and what interviewers are interested in, what people here are interested in is like who you are at your core, because that's who right, that's who continues through Oxford and who leaves Oxford and who goes out into the world. And like, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're president of student government at your college like 15 years down the line. It matters why you were president of student government. And I think that's a leadership criteria. It's the why. And I think that's sort of what all of us are trying to hit at in different ways.
Folks are saying hello from Malaysia, from Nigeria, from Canada. Great to have you. What you guys are saying about leadership actually makes me think of one of our trustees So the Rhodes Scholarship, one of the things that's amazing about it is that selecting scholars that happens, like, we're talking about these interviews, we're talking about a social engagement that finalists who get to the last round of the application process go through. And all of this is done by volunteers. So I'm thinking of one of our major volunteers, a trustee, and what she said to the new Rhodes Scholars coming in, I think maybe it was 3 years ago. And she's like, please don't think it's anything in particular that you do, because then you may think that you could do something wrong. And we actually want you to take risks. We want you to explore and experiment, because that will be a part of, becoming more and more, but it's who you are. Like, that's what we believe in. So if nothing else, kind of focusing on that, which I think relates to this question that we have, and someone is saying, look, at the end of the day, it's very competitive. There are thousands of applications. What can I do to stand out? And I can imagine maybe this person is thinking, oh, so now we have these scholarships that are available to everyone, because this is the first time that the Rhodes Scholarship is available to anyone who wants to apply, who fit the criteria. There's a scholarship for you. So it is very competitive. And what would you say to someone who's sitting there thinking, should I even apply, given how competitive it is? Is it worth it?
I think the first answer is yes. Always apply. I actually think that's in some ways the hardest part is mustering up the courage to think of yourself as being maybe good enough to apply for it. That's a hard one. And I think, just the sort of the standard line about, the only way you're going to fail is if you don't try. So you should give it a go. But in terms of how to stand out, again, I think it's maybe misunderstanding what the process is. I think it's about, obviously there are thresholds. You need to be good enough academically.
You need a good academic, yeah.
But beyond that, it's very much about who you are as an individual, and that's not something you can fake. It's not something that you can construct for these people to consume in this interview process. They're all very insightful, thoughtful individuals, and I think it's only if you have a true understanding of who you are, you look kind of deeply inside and go, why do I want to do this in the first place? What's motivating me? And then just speak to that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the thing that kind of comes out.
Absolutely. And as a pointer for everyone, definitely visit our website. That's Rhodes House, www.rhodeshouse. And you'll see there kind of under the, the application window that most constituencies, most of the scholarships are going to be open for application as of June 1st. And again, we will kind of be laying out there, and we'll have videos with scholars just like these speaking you through, what's a personal statement, how do I think about getting referees, how do I think about what I want to study while I'm there. But also if you do get to the later rounds, also, okay, so what's this interview about and how do I do that? And the reason why I bring that up, those tools are available for you, but also it really resonates with what you're saying, Harj, about actually the best preparation you can do is to really reflect about why would I want this, but also beyond the Rhodes Scholarship, like what is it that I want to do? What do I want to contribute? So before we go to the last rounds of questions, which is actually the top tip from each one of you to someone who's considering applying, and I know we've covered that a bit, but there is another question here. This is someone who's joined in from Canada. Can you speak a little bit more to the intellectual culture within the Rhodes communities and the extent of professional and competitive pressures? So we've talked a bit about what people have studied here. For some, that was a major draw, wanted to be in Oxford to study something. For others, they've been able to utilize this time and the space to reflect a bit about how their studies relate to what they want to do beyond, but specifically around the intellectual culture of the Rhodes community. And do you feel competitive pressures? Thanks for that question from Canada.
Fantastic question. I think the starting point is openness. I think it's a pretty broad church in terms of the types of people you'll find within the scholarship. I think that there are kind of intentional steps made by the scholarship and the trust itself to foster a certain attitude to discourse, to sort of inquiry, which is openness, respect for one another, and I think just trying to be reflective and thoughtful. And so I think those are kind of fairly universal values which sit underneath all of the different discrete kind of issues that come up. So it's one that I think is, for most people, very welcoming, quite inclusive, and sort of deliberately so. So I don't think it's maps onto a political spectrum. I don't think it maps onto geographical lines of being particularly English or particularly North American. I think it draws from all of the different people and kind of forces that contribute to the scholarship. So I think it's a really sort of vibrant and welcoming culture.
How do you guys feel about the intellectual culture, and then this bit about competitiveness within the community?
I'm thinking in terms of maybe like intellectual culture, I think it's actually, I think like a lot of Rhodes Scholars here are just like, they are not only like just willing to kind of like share their like life experiences or like have stories with you, they're also very open and very happy to kind of discuss big questions with you. And maybe I find that some of the conversations I've been having in Rhodes House with other fellow Rhodes Scholars in certain settings, like say maybe the Rhodes Retreat or like during particular scholar talks, were more like kind of just way more open, and people were sharing different views from different perspectives. So I actually really enjoy the sort of like intellectual diversity within Rhodes House and how open everyone is with like sharing their own views. And as for the competition side, I think during my first month here, there was a tiny bit of that. While I thought about like how other scholars, they have that like really cool CV, or they've been to these high profile events, and like I was just sat in a soybean lab. But later on, it's just the more you stay in this community, I think you start realizing it's just all about be yourself. Just be yourself. It's fine. Like, there's actually really no competition, I would put it that way. Like, everyone's here to just kind of pursue a subject that they want to study in Oxford. And now I find the Rhodes community more of a sort of like support group, kind of, that I go to. And there's really just don't get intimidated about your fellow scholars' profiles. Just meet them in person and like go have a chat with them, and you'll find out there's nothing to be like, there's no competition really.
That's so interesting to hear, because from my perspective, you see it. Like, you see the arrival and everyone kind of looking at each other like this, you know, kind of sizing each other up. Everyone's been online. And then you see it soften. You know, and actually I do see some competition, but constructive competition too. Like the way you guys push each other to do things, or actually you push each other to take care of yourselves. Like, this one's working too hard and they're not putting enough into just, you know, taking care of themselves, or they haven't been, you know, with their friends as much as they ought to be. And that can be kind of a positive peer pressure. It's interesting.
I think some of the factors which drive competition in universities kind of disappear when you get here. The fact that we are from all disciplines mean there's not a lot of logic to the idea of competing against one another, because you're just in completely different fields. I think that kind of comes with a bit of difference in age groups as well, people at different life stages. So there's just a kind of more mellow, mature dimension, which I think sort of takes away the drive. And I think competition is also kind of in the eye of the beholder a lot of the time. And I don't think that it's something that comes from the community. It's only if people maybe bring a fear or an insecurity, and it takes a while to realize, hey, these people are just, you know, on the whole, loving and supportive and interested in me as a person. So
I have a story about that. So the first month I was here, I was at dinner with some people I didn't know as well then, who ended up, you know, now they're my closest friends here, and we were all discussing it was something about, you know, politics and media, and you know, everyone at that table had gone to an Ivy League school except for me, and you know, so they were all talking, and I was sitting here and I was like, oh my god, I am the stupidest person in the room right now. Like, I am like, why am I here? You know, and at various moments I've sort of had that like flash in. But what's interesting is that, as Harj was saying, you know, that's all self-imposed type competition. You know, because I talked to some of these, you know, one of these people is like my closest friend here, and he, you know, he'll say like, you know, he's nothing but supportive, and sort of the insecurities I feel, he's like, no, that's not, like, I don't see that on you. That's something you're putting on yourself, and you know, like, and so it's interesting because the community is very supportive, and I think when competition or when that sort of fear of being, or sort of feeling of being competed against sets in, it's often, at least for myself, it's often imposed from within, and I think this is, you know, it's also helpful to see how that sort of plays out as you get to know people who are, you know, incredibly good at, you know, the very, you know, the subset of the things they do, and you're very good at the subset of the things you do. And it's sort of interesting in terms of the intellectual culture. Right, the joke is that to find like 3 Rhodes Scholars with the same opinion on something is, you know, kind of a miracle, because everyone's really willing to, like, very willing to disagree, but to disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that's, you know, that's one of the things that I've found is like a really big intellectual growing experience, is sort of refining, you know, how I think about things and what principles I actually stand on as people challenge them, but they don't challenge them in this like, ha gotcha type way, but they challenge them in like, okay, but, you know, isn't there a problem with this if you follow it down this logical conclusion? And I think that can be a bit jarring, especially in that first bit of time, but as people sort of open up and become more comfortable in the space, and, you know, like deeper communities start to form, it's a very productive competition, as you were saying, and a positive one.
Yeah, no, it's really something. I'm thinking of the way in which those insecurities and like vulnerabilities that you're speaking about, that everyone has, right? Because if you're listening to this and like you're really driven and, you know, you've accomplished some things, but you'd like to achieve more, you want, you know, support in getting there, you see how that kind of personality oftentimes also, you know, is concerned about how they're perceived or how they're coming off. But I think something that happens is that Rhodes Scholars start to realize that in each other, that I'm not the only one who's a little bit anxious about this, or I'm not the only one who's a little bit rocky on that, or still making up my mind about, you know, this, that, or the other. So I think you guys, all of us really connect on that, and then kind of become more human in a way that allows us to really support and allows us to grow and like really challenge each other and like even contest over issues and ideas, you know, in a way that hopefully is very growing. But the last question, and folks have been asking about the interview process. So we will have another Facebook Live, particularly about the application process. So please do like Facebook account, do all the rest, so we can keep you abreast of when those additional tools will be available. So everything that we've heard about, again, you know, what's the interview like, or how do you prepare the personal statement, or what it is about these reference letters that you have to get, we're going to have a specific engagement to talk about that, because it is important and we want to make sure that we offer that support. But before we wrap up, we want to hear from everyone what their top tip would be to someone who is considering applying, you know, or also for folks who are listening who are more kind of at an educational facility, or, you know, they have a niece or a nephew, or they know of someone that this could be for, you know, what's that top reason why, they ought to go for it?
I mean, I can start with this one. In my eyes, the top reason to apply is you really have nothing to lose. Like at worst, what you get is you put in time to really figuring out who you are and what you stand for at a moment in time, and what your principles are, and sort of how your experiences have shaped that. And if that's a worst case scenario from something, that's, you know, it's dedicated self-reflection time. And I think there's really nothing to lose. And it's a good way to hold yourself to putting in time to self-reflect.
Cool, you stole mine, Colin. Maybe a slightly more pragmatic one then. Just sort of reflecting on my own experience, I think it was the process of humanizing people who have this scholarship. I think that was a big part. So research can be a double-edged sword. Obviously, it can be a way to sort of accumulate unreasonable expectations for yourself. But if you can feel centered in why you're doing it, go through this process of self-reflection, and then maybe reach out, as was suggested, or speak to people at Oxford. Try and make it a bit more tangible. I think that'll make this process of reflection and then your engagement with the process a lot more easy.
Yeah. That's such a useful practical tip. And I think for everyone, if you are aware of the scholarship, then you probably have like this thin snippet of folks that you're aware of who are Rhodes Scholars. But again, like go to our YouTube channel, even just do a Google and you will see it's such a broad array of people. You know, people who have lived their research, you know, people who've gone into education at every level, people at the cutting edge of, you know, health innovation, but you would never know, you've never seen their face. And I think all of that's really important. Someone was also asking how many scholars. It's 100 scholars who are selected across the world every year. Last year when the cohort came in and we were welcoming them, we counted and we're like, oh my gosh, there are 24 different countries in the room right now. As we said earlier, this is the first year in which any country you're living in, as long as you meet the eligibility criteria as far as age, academic performance, leadership, the rest, you will be able to apply. You can be eligible, regardless of where you're from. So that's super exciting. And at any given point, it's just over 200 scholars who are in Oxford. So you will get to relate to all of them across these different countries, across these different disciplines. And there are over 4,000 Rhodes Scholars who are live, you know. Your top tip, Serena.
Last one to say something, most difficult. I would just say, just definitely just be yourself. Just don't kind of like try as hard as you can to wave away that previous perception of what you may have about what a Rhodes Scholar should be like, what a Rhodes Scholar CV should look like. It's your CV, it's your personal statement, just be yourself, basically. Just tell your life story and just say why you want to do this at Oxford and just say what you want to say. Yeah.
Perfect note to end on. Thank you, Serena. Thanks, Harj. Thanks, Colin. So it was really wonderful having you. Like the video, pass it on, and as I said, we will be back to give more, you know, life from folks who are here, perspective from folks who are currently on the scholarship, particularly for those who are considering applying or know folks who really ought to be applying. Thank you for joining.